From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
Support for this podcast comes from LG&E, reminding you not to get spooked this Halloween. If you smell rotten eggs, hear a hissing sound, or see dead plants outside near other healthy ones, it could be a gas leak. If you notice any of these signs, leave the area immediately. Then call 911 and LG&E at 502-589-1444. Find more gas safety tips at lge-ku.com/gas safety.
It's Halloween season when bats appear in holiday decorations and spooky stories, but beyond their eerie reputation, bats are year-round neighbors in Kentucky and a vital part of our environment. Matthew Springer is an associate extension professor of wildlife management at the University of Kentucky. His work focuses on wildlife ecology, human-wildlife interactions, and conservation outreach. He's contributed to public education and outreach on wildlife species, including bats. Matthew, thanks for being here.
I'm very excited to be here and glad to be here. Thank you.
So let's start with the basics. How many species of bats do we have here in Kentucky, and which ones are the most common for people to actually see?
Sure. So technically, we have basically 14 species that are really considered residents of Kentucky that spend a substantial amount of time here. And then we have two oddballs, the Seminole bat that was detected in western Kentucky and southern Kentucky that we're not sure is really a true resident of Kentucky. And then we have the Brazilian free-tailed bat. So we claim 16 potentially, but realistically it's probably about 14.
Which of those do we see mostly?
So the more common bat species that people are going to interact with are going to be the big brown bat, which is really closely tied to human dwellings, does quite well in things like barns and chimneys and attics. Occasionally you'll have species like the red bat that in walking around the forest, I'll walk through on a trail, and I've done this at Bernheim, where all of a sudden a bat will fly out of the undergrowth or off a branch in the low part of the forest, and that's a pretty common one there. And then, there's species like the little brown bat, which is also one that will live along human dwellings and do pretty well in urban, suburban environments.
And when we talk about population trends of these species, what are we really seeing? Are bat numbers going up, going down, or just shifting around the state?
I think most people have heard about the fungal disease, the white nose syndrome is the name of the disease that hit bats pretty hard here in the last almost 2 decades now. And specifically in Kentucky, we've had several of our species that got really hammered because many of them live in caves where, unfortunately, the fungus really kind of can spread through those hibernating bats and really cause major declines in many species. Some are not doing as bad, but overall, bats in general could be doing better.
What is that disease, or how does it kind of attack the bats?
The disease itself is a fungus. It lives in moist, cool environments. And if you think about where, caves in Kentucky specifically, that kind of fits that check mark right there. And it's from Europe. It was brought over, we believe, potentially from cavers. And what it does is it slowly changes the physiology of the bat, especially related to when it's hibernating in torpor. The bat basically is continuing to burn through calories as it's in hibernation mode in that torpor component. It wakes up earlier. It has to go out and it will fly around and try to forage and sometimes in the dead of winter. If you think about that in terms of a species that shuts down its metabolism in the winter to stay alive, if it wakes up in the middle of the winter and it's burning fat, it kind of slowly degrades their overall physical health and causes them to usually pass away in the winter.
And is that like one of the biggest challenges? And you said cavers, so people who are walking in caves spreading this fungus around?
Spelunkers.
Spelunkers,
yes. So that was one of the major initial thoughts of how it got here and how it probably is spreading. At this point, there's probably some spreading that's going on by the bats themselves where they may choose to hibernate in different caves. Whenever you talk about diseases, especially with wildlife diseases, it's really hard to control them. We often think about diseases in terms of human context. Well, we can just go give them a shot or some kind of medicine, and trying to catch every animal in the wild when they have a disease is almost impossible. So at this point, they're kind of moving it around themselves, and it is going to be hard to control. There's been a lot of research that's gone into trying to understand the actual fungus itself, whether or not you can go in and basically clean the cave out and when the bats aren't in there to kind of get rid of the fungus. And there was some work, I believe it was out of the University of Tennessee, that showed some positive trends in terms of reducing the fungus. But when you have bats that bring it right back in, it would be a constant cleaning. So it may not be a really, truly applicable method to save all of the bats and get rid of the fungus. But, if you think about our bats specifically have these huge hibernaculums where you can have thousands and thousands of bats in one spot. It may be something that you could use to try to save a specific colony or lower the risk to that specific colony.
Is this the main challenge in Kentucky as far as affecting the bat populations?
So bats, in terms of challenges, like many wildlife insect species, there's a lot going on in our environment. Things are changing constantly. There's human development going on. So you have habitat fragmentation that's occurring from that development. You potentially have other types of management strategies. If you think about the agricultural environment, we use a lot more pesticides than we ever did before. All of our bats are insectivores. So if you think about them constantly spraying pesticides, it's probably reducing food availability. There's been some really interesting work in terms of forestry practices that our department at University of Kentucky has done, looking at what practices in terms of harvesting trees that are actually going to benefit bats. And there's some evidence that, we can cut trees as long as we do it in certain ways. It actually could be very good for bats. The neat thing is there are a lot of bat species that can deal with human interactions quite well. If you go out into a park setting or even a golf course in an urban setting in downtown Chicago, there's bats flying around. They can tolerate some things, but there's a lot going on right now. And I think, the white nose probably is one of our biggest challenges in the state with the species that we have, just because of the geology and the caves that we have and having all these overwintering bats. And all of a sudden you put something into one of those caves that causes mass death. It's not good. So that's the big challenge.
So before we get any further, I'm hoping you can kind of walk us through some bat biology 101.
Sure, bat biology 1. So there are flying mammals, right? And there's some myths that they're flying rats or flying rodents, right? And to be honest, they're less related to rodents than they are to primates. They're so cool, and they have a lot of diversity in what they eat. We have bats that eat fish. We have bats that drink blood, right? We talked about Halloween. We have species that are relying solely on blood, and they may eventually get to the United States by the looks of things. Their range is expanding. So it's kind of there's just so many parts of bats' ecology, and they are mammals. They have usually one pup a year. They give live birth. Mom is feeding them with milk, right? They are a mammal species that can hibernate, and most of them go into some stage of hibernation, especially those that are in Kentucky, because we have the temperatures that require that. But you have some that migrate and some that don't. So there's all kinds of interesting behaviors, and yeah, they're just a neat group of animal.
Just for clarity, for some of those listening, the blood-sucking bats are not in Kentucky.
We do not have those. They're down on the islands mostly in the Caribbean, and there's some predictions that they may be in Florida eventually. But currently, we don't have that issue. And thankfully, we also don't have very big bats. Most of our bats in Kentucky are about 4 inches in size. A lot of folks think of bats, and we see this in movies like the flying foxes that are 3 feet in size and are enormous. Thankfully, we don't have that here.
Yeah.
That would freak me out, too, to be honest.
You were talking about, so some of them hibernate and some of them migrate. Are any of the bats here in Kentucky the ones that do migrate, and where do they go?
Yes. So we have some species that migrate. We actually are a destination for migrants of northern bats because of those caves that we have, which unfortunately with the white nose syndrome is a problem too. So we have bats that will fly from Pennsylvania, New York, and come all the way down to Kentucky, and some will continue further south. Others, they may be a migrating species, but don't need to because they can meet all their demands here. And usually what we see more often with bat behavior is some of them will spend winter in a cave and then spend summer in, say, forest and using trees or under a bridge. So you see some local movement, but not necessarily long-distance movement. However, we do have bats that go hundreds of miles.
Yeah, their luxury destination, it sounds like.
It can be, for sure.
What are some of the ways, bats benefit our ecosystem here in Kentucky?
All of our bats are insectivores. They eat a pretty diverse group of insects, and actually with advances in genetic work and what we can now learn about taking their guano and running it through a DNA analysis and metabarcoding, we're finding out they're eating a lot more things than we ever knew. And to our listeners' happy ears, probably, they eat mosquitoes more than we thought. We have more species of bats that eat mosquitoes than we previously thought. So in terms of what bats are doing for us, and it really gets down to pest management services. That's one of the biggest things that bats are kind of bringing to the table, and that can be in urban environments, in suburban environments, and in agricultural settings. And they are eating many of the insects that cause us problems in terms of human health. They eat the mosquitoes that do transmit many diseases that we would be concerned about, not just here in Kentucky, but across the entire, North America, South America, and abroad. But just looking at within Kentucky, they do eat a lot of our corn pest species and many of the other, vegetable-related insect pests. They're consuming all of that. So that's the big one in terms of their true ecosystem services. Many folks in other locations, you could argue that they're performing an economic service. Places like Texas, where they have the giant emergencies that come out of San Antonio under the bridge, there's a huge impact on their local economy from people that just want to watch them fly around. We don't have that scenario here in Kentucky. It would be really cool if we did. We'll see. Unfortunately, that species is the Brazilian freetail. We don't really have it here. But there's a paper that came out back in, I believe it was 2011, that cited the billions of dollars saved for pest services in agriculture alone in the United States. And in a world where we're seeing a lot of folks that have an interest in reducing the pesticide use, it would be one where more bats equals less pesticides. That'd be great.
I love that. So what do you think are some of the biggest myths or misconceptions about bats?
So there's some common ones that you constantly hear, right? So like all bats are sucking blood and consuming blood as they're, or that they're really dirty. They're actually quite clean animals. They groom themselves a lot while they're in roost. Their eyesight is fine. They're just really good at flying around at night because of echolocation and that really unique way they navigate the landscape and find prey and catch prey. There's been a lot of science communication that's happened since white nose syndrome that really has helped overcome a lot of those misnomers that existed previously.
Yeah, and I kind of want to come back to that because from what I understand, from what we've talked about, there hasn't been like a solid solution found yet. As you said, it's just learning as we go.
Many solutions need to be multifaceted. They're usually in very different forms of management. So that can be habitat related. It can be education to try to get folks on board with certain practices that are related to maybe pesticide use or when you should cut down a tree that's dying on your property because dying trees are wonderful bat habitat. So you don't want to necessarily get rid of them right away because as they decay, they're actually providing the exact thing that those bats need to, say, have a maternity colony and raise their pups in them. So there's certain things in terms of habitat that we can push, and I mentioned that we did a project on forestry practices that we can promote. There's work in terms of suburban and urban areas, talking about planting natives over invasives, trying to promote insect life that is going to be food, right? It works right up the food chain. Those kind of items and knowledge to try to empower folks to make good decisions that are going to, hopefully add up over time. Obviously, it'd be great to get rid of the fungus, but I think that one is a big one. There's some work that initially came out where we responded to trying to keep cavers out of caves to not spread white nose syndrome.
Yeah.
And we found out that putting bars on cages screws the temperatures up inside the cage.
Oh, wow.
Because you start changing airflow. So, there's some lessons learned there. And bats are very sensitive to temperatures. They try to put themselves in places and will move themselves through the day and through hibernation to match the temperature that they need physiologically to stay alive. So when you start messing with airflow in a constricted environment like a cave, that can have drastic impacts that you don't even think about until we found out it does, unfortunately, in a bad way. It's also one of the things that we talk about in terms of trying to be proactive. And there's been some work from Joy O'Keefe, who's at the University of Illinois, who has my wildlife extension position there, and Luke Dodd, who's at EKU, looking at bat boxes that are sold. There's all kinds of different styles. There's it's called a rocket box, and there's a 2-chamber. And they're looking at how picking the type of box, the location of the box, is it in full sun? Is it painted black? All those things that were really kind of made as like instruction manuals for the public to do things to help bats. And we're finding out that they're not necessarily the best thing for bats. So they're being tested, and you're trying to really find those true best management practices to help bats in every environment that you can.
So what do we know is the best practice for helping bats, whether you're a homeowner, a renter, or just someone who spends time outdoors?
It depends. This is the answer I always give in wildlife. It depends, and conservation in general, because it's all situational. If you have bats in your house, one of the things you can do is try to tolerate them because they want to be there. And if there are certain health risks, right? They're one of our number one species for rabies in the state of Kentucky, so you never ever want to pick a bat up. It is unlikely that it has rabies, but if you would get bit by the bat, you would immediately need medical attention. So if you have bats in your yard or that you can tolerate that's not going to be a public health concern, don't do anything. They put themselves there for a reason. They know where the best place to be is. You can do things like reduce your pesticide use to kill insects. Not using that's always going to be a benefit for bats, just because the intention is to reduce public health risk with mosquitoes, but that doesn't always just kill the mosquitoes, unfortunately. So you can reduce prey availability. It's more about potentially tolerating them and making some small life decisions that may not have larger impacts in scale, right? But if all your neighbors are okay with it, then maybe your neighborhood becomes this bat sanctuary in terms of having enough prey items and roosting habitat.
And you're saying if they've made a home in your home just to leave them?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying, one of the things that I get calls about a lot is we'll have bats that are using barns, and there is a concern about like a bat, and usually it's associated with guano, and the guano builds up, and people don't necessarily like that, right? Who wants to step in a pile of poop on a regular basis? Not many people. So if you have bats in your house, by no means am I saying leave the bats in your house, but there are times where it gets difficult even because of their life history. So like if you find a bat in your house in June, no one is going to be able to remove it because there's a possibility that it has a pup in your house. So like that's not great, but you'd want to wait until I believe the date's August 15th is what it is. After that, the pups would definitely be able to fly and get out. At that point, you'd want to secure your house and not necessarily have them. But learning to, I guess, live alongside them whenever you can. There are individuals that do not want to see them, and I hope that you can overcome. It's kind of like snakes too. They're kind of a little odd and different than what we're used to, and they don't necessarily want to be around them because they make them uncomfortable, and I get that. So if you can try to tolerate them as best you can, plant some more natives, reduce your pesticide use, you're doing pretty good.
Do you have any suggestions, though, for those who do, like they decide to live in their roof or whatever, like a safe removal?
So you definitely want to hire a professional in that sense because I already mentioned rabies, right? There's a concern there. They do have the histoplasma that can build up in the guano, so you don't want to necessarily just go up there and start shoveling out that. If it especially is dry, you can inhale it and get it, and that would be how you would get infected. So you want to have a professional deal with that. Then it's all about just kind of securing all the entry points and making sure all the bats are out and then making sure they can't get back in. And usually what ends up happening is they'll just move on to somewhere else that has that temperature gradient that they're looking for, usually close by. A lot of folks have tried to put up bat houses next to it in hopes they start using that. And unfortunately, it's really hard to get them to switch over because those temperatures and that microclimate that they're looking for is really hard to copy.
So the bat boxes aren't so effective because of the temperature?
It depends. They have to be put in the perfect place for them to choose them. And they can work, and they will start using them, but it's not necessarily going to be this immediate fix that you want it to be. I have put up several and have had very limited success in all of them and trying to follow the best directions possible. And then I watch some other folks, and they seem to put it up in the exact right place, and it gets used really heavily after like a year or two, and all of a sudden they have like 100 bats in it.
Wow.
So the prime example of that is if you go to the Nature Center out in LBL, they have a rocket box, which is the cylinder design, sitting in the middle of their native garden there, and there's like 100 bats in it.
Wow.
And it gets used really heavily. So it's out in the open, and you're kind of like, why there? And sure enough, doesn't matter. It's the bats that tell you why there, not you.
It's just a childhood memory in mine. It's like making that bat box in woodworking. That's the one thing you make.
Oh, we did that. I did a program right when I started where we made bat boxes for 4-H and had the given to the teachers, and they took them out, and then I think no one used it. But it just points to how hard it is to deal with. Best of intentions don't necessarily work out. You try really hard, and bats are just fighting you on it almost.
So the perfect spot is an unknown. We can't really.
It's hard to determine. Yes, it's very hard to determine.
Fair enough. Well, so if someone wants to learn more, where can they go to find more information about bats?
Bat Conservation International is kind of the big hub for a long time. There's some folks in Kentucky at Fish and Wildlife, the state agency and the federal agency that are doing all kinds of work on them. So you can reach out to your local wildlife biologist. They have these folks that will help you write management plans for your properties, and they have plans that are science-based on how you can make your forest more attractive to bats, and same with Division of Forestry also offers that service to Kentucky landowners. So there's resources out there both at the state level with Fish and Wildlife, Division of Forestry, as well as just going online. The Bat Conservation International is great. The two folks I mentioned that did the bat box work, Dr. Joy O'Keefe up in University of Illinois, she's definitely one of the premier bat biologists in the United States. And then Luke Dodd at Eastern Kentucky is a really good one. He is a great resource as well.
Well, Matthew, thank you for your time.
No problem. It was wonderful.
On Track is produced by Louisville Public Media. Our production team includes Michelle Tyreen Johnson, Laura Ellis, and me, Aisha Jaffer, with support from Sarah Kelly and Alex Biscardi. Our music is by Kojin Toshiro. Find more at LouisvilleOnTrack.org, and remember, being kind is free. That's the start of community. Thanks for listening.
Support comes from Vision Zero. On foot or behind the wheel, safety is a shared responsibility. And Vision Zero Louisville believes 0 roadway fatalities is the only acceptable amount. Their mission is to create safe roads by design, engineering solutions, and education. More information at visionzerolouisville.org.